Have you ever sat at a dinner table and felt the walls closing in? Not because the room was small, but because the people who claimed to love you most were systematically dismantling your right to exist as your own person, all while passing the mashed potatoes and smiling like this was perfectly normal. There's a special kind of suffocation that happens when control disguises itself as care, when manipulation calls itself love, when 4 simple words "you owe us everything" transform a lifetime of parenting into a debt you can never fully repay. And the worst part? You almost believe them. You almost convince yourself that wanting your own life, making your own choices, breathing your own air makes you ungrateful, selfish, a terrible daughter who doesn't appreciate the sacrifices they've made. Hey race, what nobody tells you about toxic family dynamics: they don't announce themselves with warning labels. There's no dramatic moment where your parents suddenly become villains in some dark family saga. Instead, it's a slow erosion, so gradual you don't notice you're disappearing until you look in the mirror one day and don't recognize the person staring back. It starts with small things: they don't like your boyfriend, so you break up with him. They think your major is impractical, so you change it. They worry about you living far away, so you turn down that dream job. One compromise leads to another, and before you know it, you're 26 years old and still asking permission to live your own life. The scary part isn't that they're controlling you, it's that you've been so thoroughly conditioned, you don't even realize you're in a cage until someone offers you the key. But what if I told you that the moment they overplay their hand is actually the moment you get your power back? What if that family dinner where they said "you owe us everything" could become the turning point instead of another surrender? What if the guilt they've weaponized so effectively could simply stop working the moment you decide it doesn't? This is the story of someone who heard those 4 words one too many times and decided to pay her parents back, not with compliance, not with lifelong servitude, not with the sacrifice of her own dreams, but with something they never saw coming. This is about what happens when the person being controlled realizes that no is a complete sentence, that love without autonomy isn't love at all, and that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply stop participating in your own oppression. You're about to discover how seemingly loving parents can use guilt as a weapon, how family dinners can become battlegrounds disguised as bonding time, and how the quietest rebellion is often the most devastating. You'll learn to recognize the patterns of manipulation that hide behind concern, the control that masquerades as wisdom, and the emotional debt that was never yours to pay. More importantly, you'll see exactly how one person dismantled an entire system of family control, not through confrontation, not through cutting everyone off, but through strategic action and unshakable commitment to her own autonomy. Because sometimes the greatest act of love isn't staying, it's having the courage to leave. And sometimes paying someone back doesn't mean giving them what they want, it means finally giving yourself what you deserve. Ready to see how it's done? Let's dive in. There's something almost sacred about family dinners, isn't there? The way the kitchen fills with warmth and familiar smells, the sound of chairs scraping against the floor as everyone takes their usual spots, the comfortable rhythm of passing dishes and sharing stories from the week. It's one of those moments that's supposed to feel like home in the truest sense: safe, predictable, comforting. She'd grown up with these dinners, every Sunday like clockwork, and they'd become part of her identity, part of what family meant to her. The routine creates a false sense of safety, though, doesn't it? When something happens the same way week after week, year after year, you stop questioning it. You stop looking for warning signs because everything feels so normal, so ordinary, so exactly like it's always been. That particular evening started like any other: her mother setting out the good china, her father carving the roast with that same precision he'd always had, her younger sister scrolling through her phone while pretending to help set the table. The family dinner with a calm, familiar atmosphere was their weekly ritual, the one constant in their busy lives. She'd driven 40 minutes to be there, as she did every Sunday, because that's what you do for family, right? You show up. You participate. You maintain the connection even when life gets hectic. Trust in parents still intact, she'd walked through that door with nothing but anticipation for a good meal and maybe some light-hearted conversation. There was no reason to expect anything different, no warning bell ringing in her head, no instinct telling her to guard herself. The belief that family equals protection ran deep in her bones, shaped by countless childhood memories of being defended, supported, cared for. Sure, her parents could be a bit overbearing sometimes, maybe a little too invested in her life choices, but wasn't that just what parents did? They worried because they loved. They offered advice because they had experience. They wanted to be involved because she mattered to them. Or at least, that's the story she'd been telling herself for 26 years. Sitting there that evening, laughing at her sister's joke about their neighbor's new dog, she had no idea she was about to see her entire family dynamic through a completely different lens. The toxic family dinner that would unfold wasn't announced with thunderclouds or ominous music. It arrived disguised as Sunday pot roast and small talk. What makes these moments so powerful in any family control stories is exactly this: the normalcy. The way everything looks fine from the outside, the way even the person living through it doesn't recognize the setup until it's already in motion. She felt completely at ease, her guard down, her heart open, ready to enjoy an evening with the people who'd known her longest. This immediate emotional identification is what makes it so devastating when things shift, when the mask slips, when you realize that the safety you felt was conditional all along. But she didn't know that yet. Right now, she was just passing the mashed potatoes and asking her dad about his golf game, completely unaware that this family betrayal story was about to write its first chapter with her as the unwilling protagonist. The shift happened right between the main course and dessert, so subtle she almost missed it. Her mother set down her fork with that particular kind of deliberateness that meant something was coming, something planned. "Sweetheart, your father and I have been talking," she began, her voice carrying that tone, the one that sounded gentle but had steel underneath. Her father nodded, joining the formation like they'd rehearsed this moment. The subtle shift in tone was barely noticeable at first, just a slight change in the atmospheric pressure of the room, but her sister's eyes flickered up from her phone for just a second before quickly looking away. That should have been her first clue. When the people who know your parents best suddenly find something fascinating about their plates, you're probably walking into an ambush. "We think it's time you reconsidered this whole apartment situation," her father said, his voice reasonable, almost conversational. "Living alone in the city at your age, with rent prices the way they are, it just doesn't make financial sense." Her mother jumped in seamlessly, tag-teaming with the precision of long practice. "We're not saying you can't be independent, honey. We just think you should be smart about it. Stay here for another year or two, save up properly, and then when you move out, you'll be in a much better position." Parents introduce obligation wrapped in concern, framed as wisdom, delivered with smiles. This was the Family Control Stories playbook. Page 1: make it sound like advice when it's actually a demand, make it feel like guidance when it's actually manipulation. Then came the phrase that would echo in her mind for months afterward. Her mother reached across the table, covering her hand with a grip that felt more possessive than comforting. "You owe us everything, sweetheart. We put you through college, we helped with your car, we've been there for every crisis. The least you can do is listen when we're trying to help you avoid a mistake." There it was, the manipulative phrase appears like a weapon pulled from a velvet case. "You owe us everything." For words that transformed every act of parenting into a transaction, every moment of support into a debt to be collected. Her father nodded in agreement, adding, "We've sacrificed a lot to give you the opportunities you've had. It's not unreasonable to expect some consideration in return." Guilt framed as love and sacrifice is perhaps the most insidious form of emotional manipulation family members can deploy, because how do you argue against it without sounding ungrateful? How do you say "but that's what parents are supposed to do" without seeming like you don't appreciate anything they've given you? The toxic parents narrative was unfolding in real time, complete with hurt expressions and reminders of every dollar spent, every late night they'd stayed up worried about her, every sacrifice they'd made. "We're not trying to control your life," her mother said, somehow managing to sound wounded by the very suggestion. "We just want what's best for you." Is that so terrible? Is caring about your future such a crime? The pressure in the room had intensified, the casual family dinner transformed into a courtroom where she was both defendant and jury, expected to find herself guilty of the crime of wanting her own life. When she tried to explain that she'd already signed the lease, that she'd been planning this move for months, her mother's expression shifted to something that looked almost like pity. Oh honey, you don't understand how the real world works yet, she said with that patronizing smile that made her feel 12 years old again. You think you're ready for this, but you're not seeing the bigger picture. Her father leaned back in his chair, adopting his let me explain reality to you posture. At your age, I was already thinking about buying property, building equity. You're throwing money away on rent when you could be saving, investing, planning for your future. The condescending explanations came wrapped in concern, each one chipping away at her confidence, making her question decisions she had felt certain about just hours before. Every point she raised was systematically dismantled and reframed as evidence of her naivety. But I need my own space, she ventured. Space from what? Her mother countered quickly. From family? From people who love you? That sounds like something a therapist told you, doesn't it? All this modern psychology about boundaries and independence, it's just an excuse for selfishness. When she mentioned her job being closer to the new apartment, her father waved it off. You can commute. Plenty of people do. A little drive is nothing compared to financial security. Feelings minimized or dismissed, that was their specialty, the way they could take her legitimate concerns and make them sound frivolous, childish, evidence that she needed their guidance more than ever. Her sister sat frozen across the table, eyes fixed on her barely touched dessert. Her grandmother, who had been quiet through dinner, suddenly became very interested in folding her napkin into increasingly smaller squares. Other family members remained silent, always, predictably, reliably silent. Because that's how these systems work, isn't it? Everyone sees what's happening, everyone feels the discomfort, but no one intervenes because intervening means becoming the next target. The silent revenge family dynamics that would later unfold had their roots in moments exactly like this one, where witnesses chose comfort over courage, where standing by meant standing with the aggressors by default. She looked around the table, hoping for an ally, someone who might say, hey, let her make her own choices. But there was nothing except averted eyes and the sound of silverware clinking against plates. The expectation of obedience without discussion hung in the air like humidity before a storm. So it's settled then, her father said, not as a question but as a statement of established fact. You'll call the landlord tomorrow and explain that you've changed your mind. These things happen. They'll understand. Her mother nodded, relief washing over her features. I'm so glad we could talk some sense into you before you made a huge mistake. That's what family is for, to protect you from yourself sometimes. The quiet shame she felt in that moment wasn't about the apartment or the lease or even the manipulation. It was about the realization that they genuinely believed they had the right to override her decisions, that her adult choices were subject to their approval, that she existed as an extension of their will rather than as a separate person. The breaking family control would require more than just moving out, it would require breaking the pattern of compliance she had been performing her entire life. Something shifted inside her in that moment, not with drama or fireworks, but with the quiet clarity of a door clicking shut. She looked at her parents, really looked at them, and saw them as if for the first time two people so convinced of their righteousness that they couldn't see the damage they were doing, so invested in control that they'd weaponized every act of love they'd ever given. And instead of doing what she had always done, arguing, defending, trying desperately to make them understand her perspective, she did something that surprised everyone at the table, including herself. She took a slow breath, set down her fork, and smiled. You're right, she said softly, her voice calm and steady. The protagonist does not argue, does not raise her voice, does not give them the fight they'd been prepared to win through attrition and guilt. Her mother blinked, clearly thrown by the easy capitulation. Her father's shoulders relaxed, satisfaction spreading across his face like sunrise. They'd expected resistance, tears, maybe anger, certainly days of tense silence followed by reluctant agreement. But this immediate acceptance. This calm surrender. It was almost too easy, which should have been their first warning sign. I appreciate you both looking out for me, she continued, reaching for her water glass with a hand that didn't shake. You've given me a lot to think about. Does not explain or defend herself because defense implies there's a debate to be had, an argument to be won, a possibility they might be persuaded. And Shed finally understood that this was never about persuasion. This was about power, pure and simple. The rest of dinner passed in a strange kind of normalcy, like the eye of a hurricane where everything seems calm but you can feel the pressure building. She asked her sister about school, complimented her grandmother on the pie, even laughed at her father's joke about his golf game. Calm agreement on the surface, while underneath, something fundamental had shifted in her understanding of who these people were and what this relationship actually meant. Her mother kept glancing at her, a slight furrow between her brows, as if trying to figure out if this was genuine acceptance or some new form of rebellion she hadn't encountered before. But she gave them nothing to work with, no sulking, no passive-aggressive comments, no telltale signs of resentment. Silent observation became her superpower in that moment. She watched how her mother and father exchanged that quick glance of mutual congratulation, how they relaxed into their chairs like generals who'd just won a crucial battle. She noticed how her sister's shoulders dropped with relief now that the tension had passed, how her grandmother finally started eating her dessert. The manipulative parent story she'd been living her whole life suddenly became visible in its entirety, every pattern, every tactic, every carefully constructed manipulation designed to keep her compliant. And the beautiful thing about finally seeing the strings is that once you see them, you can never unsee them. Her parents thought they'd won. They had no idea that in forcing this victory, they'd actually lost her completely. The curiosity and suspense building in that dining room wasn't coming from her, it was radiating from her sister, who'd caught her eye for just a second and seen something there that didn't match the cooperative words coming out of her mouth. That night, lying in her childhood bedroom with its faded wallpaper and memories trapped in amber, she stared at the ceiling and let 26 years of memories play through her mind like a documentary she'd never fully watched before. The high school boyfriend they'd hated until she stopped seeing him. The college major they'd suggested she change because it wasn't practical enough. The job offers in other cities they'd convinced her to decline because family is more important than career. The friends had slowly disappeared from her life because they weren't good influences. Full recognition of the manipulation pattern crashed over her like a wave, and suddenly she wasn't drowning, she was seeing clearly for the first time. This wasn't an isolated incident, a one-time overreach by worried parents. This was the entire foundation of their relationship, the operating system that had been running in the background of her life since she was old enough to have opinions of her own. Every major decision she'd made or thought she'd made had their fingerprints all over it. The realization this has happened many times before wasn't accompanied by anger, surprisingly. It was more like the moment when you finally understand how a magic trick works and feel foolish for not seeing it sooner. You owe us everything. How many times had she heard variations of that phrase? How many choices had she altered, dreams had she abandoned, pieces of herself had she trimmed away to fit into the shape they demanded? The toxic family dynamics weren't new, they'd just been so consistent, so pervasive, that she'd mistaken them for normal. Like someone raised in a house with a tilted floor who doesn't realize they've been walking at an angle their entire life until they step into a level room and feel the difference. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "So proud of you for being reasonable tonight." "That's my mature girl." She stared at those words, at the heart emoji that was supposed to make manipulation feel like love, and something crystallized inside her chest. Emotional clarity replaces confusion when you stop trying to make their behavior make sense and simply accept it for what it is. They weren't going to change. They weren't going to wake up one day and realize they'd been controlling rather than caring. They genuinely believed that their way was the right way, that their fears justified overriding her autonomy, that love gave them ownership over her life. And she could spend the next decade trying to make them see differently, or she could accept that some people are so committed to their narrative that no amount of explanation will penetrate it. The internal, irreversible decision formed not with drama but with the solid weight of certainty. She wasn't going to cancel the lease. She wasn't going to call the landlord. She wasn't going to sacrifice her life to maintain their illusion of control. But she also wasn't going to argue about it, wasn't going to try one more time to make them understand, wasn't going to give them advance warning or the opportunity to deploy their full arsenal of guilt and manipulation. Strategic silence became her strategy, not because she was afraid of confrontation, but because she finally understood that some battles aren't won through discussion. They're won through action. The female empowerment family stories always talk about often involve grand declarations and dramatic confrontations, but real power? Real change? Sometimes that happens in the quiet decision you make alone in your childhood bedroom at midnight, when you finally choose yourself over their approval. 2 weeks later, on a Thursday morning while her parents were at their standing breakfast date with friends, she moved out. Not dramatically, not with a trailer truck and a parade, just systematically, efficiently, like someone who'd learned that the most powerful statements don't need an audience. She'd packed everything the night before, boxes stacked neatly in her closet, suitcases hidden under her bed. The concrete, strategic action taken was the culmination of 14 days of careful planning, of arranging utilities and scheduling movers, of forwarding her mail and updating her address, all while showing up for Sunday dinners with a smile and agreeing pleasantly to their increasingly detailed plans for her future living with them. They had no idea. Not a single clue that while they were celebrating their victory, she was quietly dismantling their control one box at a time. She left a note on the kitchen counter, brief and impossible to misinterpret. I've moved into my apartment as planned. I'll be in touch when I'm ready. Please respect my decision. No justifications, no apologies, no opening for negotiation or debate. No confrontation or emotional outburst, just clean, irreversible action. She'd learned from watching them, actually. They'd taught her that the most effective control comes not from loud demands but from quiet certainty, from presenting decisions as already made rather than up for discussion. The irony wasn't lost on her as she drove away from the house where she'd spent her entire life trying to be good enough, compliant enough, grateful enough to earn the right to her own existence. She'd finally used their own playbook against them, and it felt like breathing after years underwater. Her phone started ringing before she'd even reached the highway, her mother's ringtone cutting through the silence of her packed car. She didn't answer. 17 missed calls by the time she pulled up to her new apartment building, voicemails filling her inbox like angry wasps. She didn't listen to them, not yet. Power shifts quietly when the person being controlled simply stops participating in the dynamic, stops showing up for the guilt trips, stops answering the calls that demand explanation and justification. The family revenge story she was living wasn't about hurting them, it was about saving herself. And sometimes the most radical act of self-preservation is simply refusing to argue about your right to exist as a separate person. By the time she'd carried the last box up to her third-floor apartment, the one with big windows and a view of the park, the one she'd fallen in love with the moment she saw if her phone had stopped ringing. The silence was almost eerie after the barrage of calls. Control loses its effect when there's no one there to control, when the buttons they're pushing no longer connect to anything. She stood in the middle of her empty apartment, surrounded by boxes and possibility, and felt something she hadn't felt in years: free. Not happy yet. Freedom and happiness aren't the same thing, and the grief would come later, the complicated mourning of a relationship that never really existed outside their construction of it. But free. The emotional power reversal was complete, and the most beautiful part was that she hadn't needed their permission, hadn't required their understanding, hadn't waited for them to release their grip. She'd simply opened her hands and walked away. The voicemails started arriving in waves, each one a masterclass in manipulation dressed as concern. Her mother's voice, tight with barely controlled panic: "You can't just leave like this. After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us. We gave you everything." There it was again, the phrase they wielded like a sword, expecting it to cut through her resolve the way it always had. Her father's message was colder, more calculated: "This is incredibly immature and disrespectful. You're making a huge mistake, and when you realize that, don't expect us to just welcome you back with open arms." Parents repeat the same manipulative phrases because it's the only language they know, the only tool in their arsenal. But repetition doesn't equal effectiveness when the person listening has finally learned to translate manipulation into what it really is: fear of losing control. By day 3, the messages escalated. Her mother left a tearful voicemail about her health, about how the stress was affecting her blood pressure, about how she couldn't sleep or eat knowing her daughter was out there all alone without family support. Guilt and authority are pushed harder when the usual tactics stop working, like turning up the volume on a broken speaker and hoping it'll somehow start functioning again. Her father tried a different approach. Anger wrapped in righteousness. Your mother is sick with worry. You're being selfish and cruel. We're your parents. We deserve better than this. The dark family drama they were creating had them as the victims, her as the villain, completely incapable of seeing that they'd written this script themselves through years of control disguised as care. Her grandmother called next, clearly recruited as reinforcement, her voice gentle but insistent. Sweetheart, your parents just want to talk. Can't you at least call them back? Family doesn't abandon family over disagreements. Then her sister, awkward and obviously coached. Mom's really upset. She cried all through dinner last night. Can you just, I don't know, meet them halfway or something? The flying monkeys were being deployed, each one carrying the same message wrapped in different packaging. Come back, comply, remember your place. But nothing works anymore when you've finally seen the mechanism behind the magic trick. Their tears, their anger, their recruitment of others, it was all part of the same pattern, the same desperate attempt to reassert control through emotional manipulation. The final voicemail from her mother was perhaps the most revealing. Gone was the anger, replaced by something that sounded almost like bewilderment. I don't understand what we did wrong. We only ever wanted what was best for you. We've given you everything. How can you just throw us away like this? Fear changes sides when the power dynamic shifts, when the people who've always been certain of their authority suddenly find themselves powerless. They were afraid, now afraid of losing relevance in her life, afraid of what her independence said about their parenting, afraid that maybe all those years of control had built walls instead of bridges. The collapse of control was happening in real time, and they had no idea how to function in a relationship where they didn't hold all the power. She listened to that final message twice, not out of guilt but out of curiosity, amazed at how they still couldn't see or refused to see that wanting what's best for her had always meant wanting what we think is best, regardless of what she wants. 6 months into her new life, sitting in her apartment with morning light streaming through those big windows she had fallen in love with, she finally understood something profound. Family is not permission to control. The people who share your DNA, who raised you, who claim to love you more than anyone else in the world, none of that gives them the right to dictate your choices, manipulate your emotions, or treat your autonomy like a privilege they can revoke at will. This wasn't a lesson she had learned from a book or a breakthrough therapy session, though both had helped. This was bone-deep knowledge earned through the painful process of breaking free, through the guilt she had waded through the nights she had questioned whether she was being ungrateful or finally being sane. The controlling parents who had shaped her entire existence had inadvertently taught her the most valuable lesson: that real love doesn't require obedience, doesn't demand sacrifice, doesn't keep score. She had established boundaries after those first chaotic weeks, another concept that had been completely foreign to her before the move. She had sent a single text after 2 weeks of silence and willing to have a relationship with you, but it needs to be different. He'll call once a week. Topics about my life choices, my apartment, or my decisions are off limits. If you can't respect that, he'll end the call. Her mother had responded with outrage, her father with ultimatums, but Shed held firm. Love does not create debt, Shed realized. Parents choosing to raise a child, to pay for their education, to support them through challenges, those aren't loans to be repaid with lifelong compliance. Those are choices parents make, and if they're made with strings attached, with invoices to be collected later, then they were never truly gifts at all. They were investments in control. The first few phone calls were disasters. Her mother would inevitably veer into forbidden territory, and she'd calmly say, "I told you that topic is off limits. I'm going to hang up now. He'll try again next week." Click. Her hands shook the first time she did it. By the 10th time, it felt almost routine. Guilt only works when it's accepted, Shed learned. It's like a package delivered to your doorstep. You can choose not to sign for it, can let it sit there unclaimed until the sender realizes you're no longer participating in that transaction. The emotional manipulation family members deploy loses all its power when you stop internalizing it, when you stop agreeing that their interpretation of events is more valid than your lived experience. Shed stopped agreeing. That simple act of persistent disagreement, maintained consistently over months, had fundamentally altered the entire dynamic. Something remarkable happened around month 4. Her mother called and actually asked about her day without immediately segueing into criticism or guilt. It lasted maybe 3 minutes before old habits resurfaced, but it was there a glimpse of what relationship might be possible if they could evolve past control. She didn't know if they'd ever fully change, if they'd ever truly understand why Shed had to leave the way she did. But Shed learned the most important lesson: cycles break silently, not through explanation. She hadn't convinced them she was right. Shed simply stopped needing their approval to know she was. The silent revenge family dynamics had come full circle, not in her hurting them, but in her healing herself. Shed built a life on her own terms, a job Shed chosen, friends who respected her boundaries, hobbies Shed never had time for before, mornings where she woke up without that familiar knot of anxiety in her chest. And maybe that's what true freedom looks like: not the absence of family, but the presence of choice, the ability to say no without guilt, the understanding that you owe no one your autonomy in exchange for love. Shed paid them back, all right, not with compliance, but with the truth they'd never wanted to hear: that she was her own person, and she always had been. So here's the question that might keep you up tonight, the one you need to ask yourself with brutal honesty: how much of your life is actually yours? When you make decisions about where to live, who to date, what career to pursue, how to spend your time, are those truly your choices, or are they carefully calculated moves designed to avoid guilt trips, manipulative tears, and the soul-crushing phrase, "after everything we've done for you"? How many dreams have you shelved because someone who claimed to love you convinced you that their fear was more important than your freedom? And here's the harder question, the one that cuts deeper: how much longer are you willing to live as a supporting character in someone else's story about what your life should look like? Think about the last time someone in your family made you feel guilty for wanting something they didn't approve of. Really think about it. Not the sanitized version you tell yourself where maybe they had a point, not the rationalized narrative where you convince yourself they meant well, but the raw truth of how it actually felt in that moment. Did it feel like love? Or did it feel like control wrapped in concern, manipulation disguised as wisdom, their need for power masquerading as worry for your well-being? That instinct you've learned to silence, that voice you've trained yourself to ignore, that feeling in your gut that screams this isn't right, what if it's actually the healthiest, sanest part of you trying desperately to save your life? What if every time you override your own judgment to keep peace with people who will never be at peace unless they're in control, you're not being mature or loving or dutiful, you're just slowly erasing yourself? The woman in this story didn't break free because she stopped loving her parents. She broke free because she finally started loving herself more than she feared their disapproval. That's not selfish, that's survival. That's not betrayal, that's evolution. That's not abandonment, that's choosing life over slow suffocation. And if you saw yourself in this story, if you recognized those family dinners and guilt-laden phone calls and the crushing weight of expectations you never agreed to carry, then maybe it's time to ask yourself what you're actually protecting by staying small. Spoiler alert, it's not love you're preserving, it's a system of control that benefits everyone except you. The people who truly love you will celebrate your autonomy. The ones who weren't loving you in the first place, they were using you. Here's what I want you to do right now, before the moment passes and the old programming kicks back, and identify one area of your life where someone else's control is masquerading as care. Just one. Maybe it's a parent who monitors your finances to help, a family member who makes decisions about your life because they know best, or guilt-laden expectations about how you should spend your time, your money, your energy. Write it down. Look at it honestly. Then ask yourself the question that changes everything: is this love, or is this control? And more importantly, what are you going to do about it? Not what you should do to make everyone happy, not what would avoid conflict, not what would maintain the illusion of family harmony. What are you going to do to reclaim that piece of yourself? Because here's the truth, they don't want you to know you don't need their permission to live your own life. You never did. If this story resonated with you, if it gave you that electric shock of recognition that says I needed to hear this, then don't let it end here. Subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell, because we're going to keep exploring these dynamics, keep shining light on the manipulation that hides behind family loyalty, keep having the conversations that make people uncomfortable but desperately need to be had. You're not alone in this. There are thousands of people waking up to the same truth that family should expand your life, not shrink it, that love without freedom isn't love at all, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for everyone involved is establish boundaries and enforce them without apology. Share this with someone who needs permission to choose themselves. And remember, guilt only works when you accept it. The debt was never real. You don't owe anyone your autonomy in exchange for love. Your life is yours. Now go live.